And welcome back to Racing Rundown. This is actually our first YouTube video of 2023, so Happy New Year to the YouTube listeners. And with the new year comes the inevitable discussion that I never like to have, but I always do just because it's a big topic in racing. A lot of people like to talk about it, so I will be the sucker that does it because someone's got to do it. Eric doesn't like to talk about the Eclipse Awards. Frankly, I really don't like to talk about them either, but someone's got to do it, so I'm stepping forward to do this. And yes, we are talking about the Eclipse Awards, but this isn't going to be me putting together my ballot or, me going... I am going to go in depth on some of them because some of them for some reason do need to be discussed in depth. But for the most part, I'm just going to be going through the awards that there isn't really a lot of disagreement for, and cases for are pretty cut and dry. We'll go through those really quickly, and then we will talk about the awards that there has been a lot of debate for, go into those, and get into that. I will mention on Tuesday we're going to be having Jay Privman on Racing Rundown. We're going to do some Eclipse Award discussion, more of a divisional look ahead, but there will be some discussion there. But we're not getting him on to specifically talk about the Eclipse Awards, and we're not doing anything on Racing Rundown aside from one thing that we'll do in a couple of weeks that will be our own system of doing Eclipse Awards. But aside from that, this is it for the discussion that we're going to have. So I just want to talk about the awards, run right through the ones really quickly that there's not a lot of debate for. So we'll start off with the 2-year-olds. Fortes had the best year, obviously, with winning the Hopeful, the Breeders' Futurity, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He's going to win the 2-year-old male award. Should win that. There's really no debate on that front. Same thing with Wonder Wheel, winning the Alcibiades and winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile filly. So no debates really with either of those two, and no disagreements from me on that front either. And I should also mention, I'm not going to get into, talking about finalists came out today as I'm recording this on Saturday. So finalists came out today. I'm not going to be getting into finalists because finalists are essentially not relevant when it comes to Eclipse Awards. So it really just is for those really just turn into people to get upset about certain horses not getting referenced and getting referenced with finalists. So really, I don't care. And I'm also not going to get into ranking horses second or third because that's another thing that, frankly, I don't care about. That's up to individual writers. I may have my own opinions and may think that certain horses being ranked second or third on people's ballots are ridiculous, but it really doesn't matter. And it's another thing that really I don't care that much about. So we'll pick back up, as I said, with the 2-year-olds. 3-year-old filly, again, cut and dry. Nest. Nest had the best year. I will say one horse that I do hope gets some people that give her some votes is McCulloch. McCulloch wasn't named a finalist. I do think McCulloch deserves some votes because she did win 2 stakes races in very fine fashion this year, the Belmont Oaks and Jockey Club Oaks, and then was second in her 4 other races this year, including one of those being an additional Grade 1 placing. So I expect someone will vote for her, and I will be glad to see that if she does get one vote. Not that I would personally give her a first place vote, but I just always like to see those horses that obviously don't have a case to win the award, but somebody out of respect for the campaign that they had gives them the vote. But Nest easily with that award. The older horses categories, obviously Flightline will win the older male award very easily, even though he had a very abbreviated campaign this year. I have seen, some people argue that Flightline doesn't deserve to have the award, which I think that's fair because he did not have a full campaign, but I personally think that he should get every award that he's eligible for, this one and then Horse of the Year, because he was the best horse that ran this year. So Flightline, and then for older female, this is Malathott's award. I do want to say I appreciate the campaign that Goodnight Olive had this year, but this is Malathott's award. She's coming back next year though, Goodnight Olive, so this will obviously be an award that she'll have a chance to win. She'll win her own Eclipse Award on this, so that's one thing. Respect the campaign, certainly respect the fact that she will get some traffic for this award, but this is absolutely Malathott's award, the Racing Rundown Queen. The last time we'll get to talk about her in respect to her campaign and not her as a broodmare. Moving on now to female sprinter. I'm going to get back to male sprinter because I think that's the toughest Eclipse Award to talk about. Female sprinter, as I said, good night all, very cut and dry award. I'm glad that Caravel, I said I wasn't going to get too much into finalists, but I'm glad that Caravel got some mention with this award, and I'll get more to Caravel when we talk about the male and female turf awards, which I'm going to skip over those because those are a complete tire fire, and we have to spend a lot of time talking about those. Moving on to steeplechase, I'm not an expert on steeplechase racing. We don't really cover steeplechase racing here on Racing Rundown, so I'm speaking from a position where I don't really know a whole lot about these horses. Henwick, I would think is very likely to get that, given he had a very strong campaign over in Europe and then won the Group 1 steeplechase race, or the Grade 1 steeplechase race, I should say, at Fair Hill. Don't necessarily like the logic of giving a top European horse who has one race in this country the award, but again, we don't do steeplechase racing on Racing Rundown. These are not horses that I'm very expert on, so that's just my 2 cents on that front. We'll likely get it. I don't really have a major issue with him getting it, but as I always say, I'll get into that more when we get to some of the awards that we have to spend some more time with. Owner and breeder, I'm going to group these together because I do think Godolphin should win this award. I think Summer Wind has a good chance and probably will win Champion Breeder because of Flightline, but it really should be Godolphin. If you look at Godolphin's racing operation, they won 13 Grade 1s in the United States this year with 10 different horses. Those are just ridiculous numbers. They're obviously a racing empire, and yes, they won the award last year, and maybe there's some in 2020 as well. Maybe there's some Godolphin, or they won Champion Owner in 2020, not Breeder in 2020. They won both last year, though. Maybe there's some Godolphin fatigue, but at the same time, I really don't care. They have the best racing operation. As I said, 13 Group 1s with 10 different horses is incredible. Obviously, Summer Wind will get a lot of traffic because of Flightline. And then Peter Brandt had a very good year in his own right, but he only had 7 Grade 1s with 4 different horses compared to Godolphin. And Peter Brandt was primarily regulated to just female turf horses, where you have Godolphin, who, yes, they won their 4 Breeders' Cup turf, or they won their 3 Breeders' Cup turf races, but you also have Cody Swish, who won his nice set of Grade 1 races. Santine on the American turf side of things, Proxy won the Clark, Matarea won the Acorn, and then also Speaker's Corner winning the Carter. So you have their Grade 1 wins are more varied across different divisions, whereas Peter Brandt is limited to just female turf horses with that. Champion Trainer, I think this is close between Pletcher and Chad Brown, but ultimately I'd give it to Pletcher because Pletcher had the Champion 2-year-old male, the Champion 3-year-old filly, a horse who, if he had a full campaign in Mo Donegal, would have been a very strong contender for 3-year-old male, and also he had Malathot, the Champion older female. So very strong year for Todd Pletcher. I would give him the award. And for Irad Ortiz, record-breaking season, won 80 stakes races. It's really cut and dry. There's no one who should get the award over Irad. Irad's not my favorite rider, and I do criticize him fairly often, but he does deserve to win this Eclipse Award, and it really should not be close. We're going to move on now to talking about the awards that have some debate behind them. And we'll get into the award, the first award that we're going to talk about in this bunch, and that's the Champion 3-year-old. And Champion 3-year-old this year it's a lot closer than I than I would have evaluated it after the Breeders' Cup, because I do think there are 2 very strong cases for this award. Obviously, Taba and Epicenter are the 2 horses. I shouldn't say obviously, but Taba and Epicenter are the 2 horses that I'm referencing with this. Epicenter's case, and I am someone who believes very strongly that Epicenter should win this award. Now, it's a lot closer than I thought, than I evaluated it back after the Breeders' Cup, because obviously you do have to respect the year that Taba had. Taba has the 3 Grade 1s, and this'll be the first that I'll mention this. I don't think that Grade 1 should be the be-all and the end-all the way that they have been marketed this Eclipse Award. You see people, and specifically on the social media front, talking about oh, Taba has 3 grade 1s, and that's more than anybody else in the 3-year-olds. That's fine. You can mention that. But are we not gonna remember that Epicenter's a horse that ran second in the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness? The two of the 3 biggest races of the year for 3-year-olds, Epicenter was second in. Now, the problem with Epicenter and Taba, which makes them difficult to separate, is they both have races against each other where you can give the other horse a significant pass in. Taba was pushed to get to the Kentucky Derby, was certainly not ready for it, and that's why he ran as poorly as he did in the Kentucky Derby, and on talent is a lot closer to Epicenter than the Kentucky Derby would reflect. Then you have the Breeders' Cup Classic, where obviously, unfortunately, Epicenter broke down there, so you really cannot evaluate those two horses based on the campaigns that they had in the head-to-head matchups against each other. Now, you can also criticize the fact that Epicenter and Taba didn't run against each other in 2 instances where they could have had the chance to. Epicenter went up to Saratoga and ran in the Jim Dandy as opposed to going to the Haskell to challenge Taba, and then Epicenter just passed up the Pennsylvania Derby entirely just to train up to the Breeders' Cup Classic. But Epicenter only has this 1 grade 1, and that is the primary criticism against Epicenter. Only 1 grade 1 win. But there's 2 things that should be mentioned about that. First of all, it was the best race that any 3-year-old ran this year on dirt. The best 3-year-old race on dirt this year was absolutely the Travers. I'm sorry, it was better than the Pennsylvania Derby. And Epicenter this year has beaten all the top other 3-year-olds that have been put in front of him. Let's go back to very early in his campaign at the Fairgrounds. Risen Star, he beat Xandon and Smile Happy, who subsequently followed up with a 1-2 in the Bluegrass. Louisiana Derby, he didn't really beat anybody there, which is a fair point to bring up, but subsequently in the Kentucky Derby beat everybody except for Rich Strike, and it took a once-in-a-decade pace meltdown to beat him in the Kentucky Derby. Then in the Preakness, once again beat everybody except for early voting, and he got a very questionable ride from Joel Rosario in the Preakness there, and ultimately I think if he gets a better ride, probably could have won the Preakness, but point is he was second in both the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. Then you have the Jim Dandy where he beats early voting handily, beats Xandon. It was a very strong effort for him there, and also beats a very good stakes winner in Tawnyport there. Travers already mentioned, and then unfortunately what happened in the Breeders' Cup Classic. You contrast that with Taba. Now, Taba beat a very weak field in the Santa Anita Derby, didn't really beat a whole lot of a better field in the Malibu. So, you can argue that a couple of Epicenter's graded stakes fields. Oh, and by the way, one other horse that I want to mention that was in Epicenter's Risen Star, in addition to Xandon and Smile Happy, you also had multiple stakes winner Slow Down Andy. You also had Tawnyport. You also had Papa Cap, who didn't win any major races, but ran some really bang-up races. So Epicenter beat some really quality horses in the Risen Star. It was better than his Louisiana Derby field, and it was absolutely better than the field that Taba beat in California in the Santa Anita Derby. So while the Risen Star is a grade 1, that was a much better field than Taba beat in his grade 1. And then obviously, as I mentioned, even though the Jim Dandy was a grade 2, that was against 2 grade 1 winners and that was against a Preakness winner, and then another grade 1 winner, and Tawnyport, as I already mentioned, quality regional stakes winner when he had won the Ohio Derby. So Taba's case, now the Pennsylvania Derby was certainly a very strong race for Taba, absolutely. But you contrast that, as I already mentioned, with the Santa Anita Derby. And the thing is I really don't agree with the way the Kentucky Derby is being ignored with this horse. And that's fine if you want to ignore the Kentucky Derby with Taba, because, again, the reason is there. But if you're going to ignore the Kentucky Derby with Taba, you got to ignore the Breeders' Cup Classic with Epicenter. So you can't do one or the other. You have to ignore both of these horses' uncharacteristically bad in terms of the Kentucky Derby, and then unfortunate situation in terms of the Classic for Epicenter. So really, it comes down to overall, for me, it comes down to overall quality of a camp. And Epicenter had a much longer campaign than Taba did. Epicenter beat more top-level horses than Taba beat. And then also, once again, I don't think that running second in 2 legs of the Triple Crown should be undervalued the degree that it's being undervalued with Epicenter. So obviously, as I said, Epicenter should get the award. Taiba had a very strong campaign this year. Obviously, following up the Santa Anita Derby with his two Grade 1 wins. Very strong campaign. The Malibu was a very good way to end the year. It's a tough case, but ultimately you have to give it to Epicenter because Epicenter had the better body of work this year. And you look at, yes, he only won one Grade 1, but you look at 2 of his Grade 2 races were against the best, were very, very top quality Grade 2 races. The Risen Star was, and I haven't heard enough people talk about how strong the Risen Star field was. The Risen Star was a very good field, and then the Jim Dandy was a short field, but it was against 2 Grade 1 winners and Tawnyport. So that's the debate with Epicenter and with Taiba. We'll get now to, this will be a good segue to get to male turf, because I also want to reference Modern Games in context of the Champion 3-Year-Old Award. Modern Games should not get any first place votes for Champion 3-Year-Old, and I think it's ridiculous the fact that people are legitimately advocating for Modern Games to win Champion 3-Year-Old. Now, I think it's perfectly fair to say turf 3-year-olds are undervalued in this country and should get some recognition when it comes to awards. But Modern Games is not the horse to do that with. Let's just take everything aside from the, okay, well, he only ran 2 races in the United States. Let's just take that all away. I have seen, this is the talk that I've seen with Modern Games from every single person that has brought him up on Twitter and any social media discussions with him. It's, oh, Modern Games won 2 Grade 1s, one of them being a Breeders' Cup race in the United States, and then he also won a Group 1 in France, and then was second behind Baid. And the Group 1, of course, it's being referenced as his win in the French Guineas, and then he was second behind Baid in the Goodwood Cup. That's fine, but, and this is what aggravates me to no end when it comes to people evaluating these European horses for these Eclipse Awards. And I really don't want to be this person and to sound like this, but I watch a lot of European racing. And I think it's, I honestly think I'm fair to evaluate myself that I watch more European racing than the average American race watcher does. And I have seen so many people cherry pick Modern Games record from 2022. Because for all the talk that I've heard about his French Guineas and his 2 Grade 1 wins here, I have not heard a single person bring up his 5th place finish in the Prix Jean Prat when he was beaten by Tenebrism, beaten 5th in that race. And that was not a good effort for Modern. He was only beaten a length and a half, but Tenebrism is not anywhere near a top-level 3-year-old filly in Europe. And you look at the horses that finished in front of Modern Games there. It was not a good race for Modern Games, but you have people ignoring that race. Let's go one race before that, the French Derby. There's a legitimate excuse for that there, but he was still beaten in the French Derby. Let's go a couple of races forward, or 3 races forward from the Prix Jean Prat at Deauville. He was beaten second by Bayside Boy in the Queen Elizabeth II at Ascot. Now, you can, once again, forgive him because he was running on a surface that maybe he doesn't like, but also, I've always disputed that Modern Games is, I've always argued with people that Modern Games is not as much of a firm turf specialist as everybody thinks he is, because you go back and you look at the race that he ran in the French Guineas, and he ran a very strong winning effort there. Modern Games is a nice horse, and he should win the Male Turf Award in the United States, because there's no American that has a really strong case for it. I love Casa Creed, and Casa Creed had a great year this year with the stretch that he went on in the summer, but, you know, the races beforehand in the Middle East and then the ugly couple of races that he ran afterwards just make it impossible to grant him the award, and nobody else, none of the local American horses have a good case for it. If Nation's Pride had won the Belmont Derby, which I think he lost that race because of circumstance, but if Nation's Pride had won the Belmont Derby, he would have a much stronger case, but since he did not win that race, he does not have a case for it. Rebels Romance, 1 race in America this year. When you compare him to his stablemate Modern Games has 2. That's an easy decision to go with here. But with Modern Games for 3-year-old male, stop cherry picking his campaign. If you're going to praise him for the second behind Baid and the victory at Longchamp in the French Guineas, don't ignore the French Derby, don't ignore the Prix Jean Prat, and don't ignore the Queen Elizabeth II and Ascot like everyone is doing. And if you're someone who says, well, Modern Games won 2 Grade 1s and Epicenter won one one grade one, and if you want to factor in his Europe stuff, he won 3. I'm sorry, if you're someone who grade ones are the be all and end all for you, then you must vote for Taba, because this is an American award. You gotta vote for the horse that has the most grade ones in North America. If your mindset is grade ones are the be all and the end all, I have already said my mindset is not that. But if you're someone who's going to vote for modern games based on he won 2 grade ones in North America, which is more than Epicenter, then you have to vote for Taba. But aside from that, the biggest issue that I have is the cherry picking of Modern Games' campaign in Europe. I already laid that out. I'm gonna end that here, because I've said Modern Games should not get first place votes for Champion 3-year-old. Should be Champion Male Turf. I already laid that out. But he should not get votes for Champion 3-year-old. We'll move on now to Male Sprinter, which is a very tough award. And I'm really only considering the two big horses in this award, Jackie's Warrior and Elite Power. And this is kind of an example of how much do you want to value the Breeders' Cup? Because Jackie's Warrior had a good campaign in the early part of this year. You know, it wasn't great. Jackie's Warrior certainly did look in some of his races like he was a little bit of a step down than he was last year, but he still won 2 grade ones and 4 graded stakes races in the early part of this year, and a couple of them were very impressive visual races, but he also didn't really beat a whole lot of horses. Then he got beat in the Forgo, and he got beat in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Then you look at Elite Power, who did a lot of his running in allowance races, didn't jump up into stakes company until the Vosburg, which he won very nicely, and he had a very strong victory in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. But ultimately, you're going to go with one horse that didn't finish out the campaign very strongly, or one horse that didn't get going late, and you would be giving the award largely based on the Breeders' Cup, which I don't love either of those. Ordinarily, in other cases, I would look for some alternate, but I don't want to give the award to Jack Christopher because frankly, I really don't respect the connections for retiring him with as much left in the tank as they did. So I really don't want to validate that decision by voting for that horse or advocating for that horse to win an Eclipse Award. There's no one that has a really great case for turf sprinting. If Golden Pal wasn't so inconsistent, Golden Pal would have a case, but since he was, can't give it to Golden Pal. There's really no better option here. You're going to be forced to choose between one of those two. I'm just going to go with Jackie's Warrior here because Jackie's Warrior overall turned in the better campaign in 2022 in stakes company. Elite Power, definitely the better horse toward the end of the year, but I think when you look back at the Churchill Downs, the True North, and the Alfred Vanderbilt, that series of 3 races is enough, barely, but it's enough for me to give Jackie's Warrior the Eclipse Award. And now we'll move on to the final award, and the award that gets me the most frustrated, and it was the one that got me the most frustrated last year because once again, you have a horse in Warlike Goddess who is the best talent of the female turf horses, but she's going to be deprived of another Eclipse Award because she did not win a Breeders' Cup race. Now, I will concede, this is not as cut and dry as it was last year. Last year was just flat out ridiculous that Loves Only You got the award off of only one race in America, and Warlike Goddess was ignored. Warlike Goddess's 4-race stretch was ignored. And this is a gripe that I have with female turf racing in general. It is incredibly undervalued in terms of graded stakes races. The complaint all the time, by the way, just a quick aside, is we have too many graded stakes races and too many grade ones. That's true, but we don't have enough. We don't have enough high level graded races for females going long on the turf. And Warlike Goddess is very good at going long on the turf. When jockeys don't get in her way, I'm looking at you, Joel Rosario. When jockeys don't get in her way, Warlike Goddess doesn't lose horse races. And that is why Warlike Goddess is going to lose this Eclipse Award, because she lost the Flower Bowl. And unfortunately, as much as I would love to give her the Eclipse Award, that's something that you have to take into account. Now, I will say I would still vote for her in this situation, but I'm forcing myself to evaluate between the two Peter Brandt horses in Italian and Regal Glory, because Warlike Goddess is not going to get this award. I understand that. I've come to terms with it. I think it's ridiculous, but she's lost this award because she didn't win the Flower Bowl, and it's a lot more difficult after her third place effort in the Breeders' Cup to give her the award. I would still vote for her, but I understand why she's not going to get it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but once again, I've come to terms with it, and I'm looking at this debate in terms of those two. But I need to get that out there because once again, and this is a problem with the fact that races are not valued to the degree that they should be. There's only one Grade 1 going along on the turf for females in North America, in the United States, and that's to New York, and that's 1.25 miles, and that's in June. So from June onwards until the Breeders' Cup, there's no Grade 1, and in this year, the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, by the way, was run at 1 3/16 miles. So after June, there was no Grade 1 in the United States at a distance of 1.25 miles or greater for horses like Warlike Goddess to win. So she can run the table in races like the Bewitch and the Glens Falls and the Flower Bowl, which, I mean, she didn't win the Flower Bowl this year, but even if she did win the Flower Bowl this year, she would still lose this award because of the fact that Grade 1s are so ridiculously overvalued when it comes to these Eclipse Awards, and these other races are undervalued. And that's the problem with Warlike Goddess, is she runs the table in these races, and she gets ignored. And I also want to, before I get into talking about the two Brandt fillies, I also want to briefly mention Caravel. I referenced her with when I was talking about female sprinter. I'm glad that she got some Eclipse Award traffic, but Caravel, absent her inconsistency, and still, Caravel would be a horse that I would give a lot more consideration to. I would leave, if I was creating a ballot, I know I said I wasn't going to do first, second, third, but if I was creating a ballot, I would leave one of the Brandt fillies off and go with Warlike Goddess, Caravel, and the Brandt filly that I chose. Not necessarily in that order, but Caravel deserves some respect for the campaign that she turned in this year, because Caravel won 4 stakes races this year on the turf, including a Breeders' Cup race. But the reason that she falls short in this discussion is because of her inconsistency, and unfortunately, and I'm not going to complain that she's not going to get this Eclipse Award because of her inconsistency, but once again, this is a horse that won 2 of the biggest races pre-Breeders' Cup in her division, the Franklin and the Caress, the Intercontinental, the Franklin and the Intercontinental, and those are both Grade 3s. And if she had won, let's just say she had won the Caress, that would still be 3 Grade 3s, and it would fall short of the 3 that Regal Glory has and the 2 that In Italian has. So people would say, oh, well, Caravel doesn't have the greatest stake success. So this is, or the Grade 1 success. So this is another problem, because if there's a division that's more undervalued than females running long in the turf, it's females turf sprinting. Long-winded way of talking about how much of a problem there we have with not valuing female turf racing enough. Now we'll get to the 2 Brandt fillies. I don't think In Italian should get this award. Now, it's a lot closer than it would have been had In Italian not run as well as she did in the Breeders' Cup. And her Breeders' Cup effort brings her a lot closer to Regal Glory. And you say, okay, well, she beat Regal Glory on one occasion. And I say to that, okay, well, Regal Glory beat her in the Justa game. So there's not really a strong, there's not a strong head-to-head case with the other 2. And I look at the campaign that Regal Glory had this year, and I look at the campaign that In Italian had this year, and it's not the 3rd Grade 1. The 3rd Grade 1 is not the thing that puts Regal Glory over the top in this situation for me. I look at the run that Regal Glory had in the 4-star Dave, and running second in a Grade 1 behind Casa Creed, who's a very talented horse in his own right, does more for me than Regal Glory winning the Chad Brown Invitational Diana, which was basically what she did. Now, she beat a very talented group in that race. Every horse in that Diana was a Grade 2 winner or higher, and 4 of the 5 of the American horses in that race, and I'm doing that because I need to leave out creative flair for this, before the 5 American horses were Grade 1 winners. So In Italian beat a very good group of horses there, but she beat all her stablemates, which is what she did subsequently in the First Lady. Now, you can say that Regal Glory, or I'm sorry, that In Italian was being ridden like a rabbit in the Just a Game for Regal Glory, and that would be the reason that you would give the award to her over In Italian, or over Regal Glory. And I'd say that that's fine, but you could also say the same thing in the First Lady, that Regal Glory, or that In Italian was able to trip out. And, if that race, once again, wasn't a Chad Brown Invitational, then maybe it's a lot fairer for Regal Glory. So, essentially, I value Regal Glory's Just a Game Jenny Wiley wins more, and her runner-up effort behind Casa Creed, more than I value 2 Grade 1 wins in Chad Brown Invitationals. Once again, it's a lot closer because the Breeders' Cup effort for In Italian is absolutely there, and for Regal Glory, it's not. But Regal Glory did turn in a very good effort to win the Matriarch. So this is a tough award if you're forcing yourself to if you're pigeonholing yourself in between choosing those two. But of the two, I'd give it to Regal Glory. 3 Grade 1 certainly do help, but it's the fact that she ran, ultimately the deciding factor for me was I thought she ran a better race in her victory over In Italian than In Italian ran over her in the First Lady, and it does, and second place finish in a Grade 1 against Casa Creed does a lot more for me than 2 Grade 1 wins in Chad Brown Invitationals and a Breeders' Cup placing. So it's a tough award, but it's a tough decision to choose between those two. I would vote for Regal Glory over In Italian, but as I said, I do think Warlike Goddess should win this award because the victory in and I also didn't mention the victory in the Turf Classic, where she beat an admittedly very weak group of males, but she beat the males in that race, and then she had a very credible Breeders' Cup placing effort. But she's not going to get it because she lost the Flower Bowl, and even if she won the Flower Bowl, she still would not get this award because of the ridiculousness that comes with the Grade 1 talking point. So that's a long-winded way of me working and complaining about the system and how underappreciated Warlike Goddess is and just female turf horses in general. But those are my thoughts on the Eclipse Awards. Once again, I made it seem like I care a lot more about these awards than I actually do. Don't really care a whole lot. Eric and I are going to do some special in a week or two in regard to the Eclipse Awards. When they're awarded, we're not going to talk about them on the podcast. As I said, Jay Pribman's going to come on. We're going to do a divisional, just general division talk with him. We will talk about some Eclipse Awards, but we're not going to do a whole lot with that. That will be on Tuesday, so hopefully we will see you for that. And we will see you next time on Racing Rundown. Have a good one.